angel. We're going to watch Father. Okay? This is at Star of the Sea. Okay? Okay? So you watch it, okay? So
the hosts you receive for communion should be hosts that are consecrated at that Mass. It's not possible in most parishes to do that for everybody. In general, it can be done more than it was in the past, and that's been implemented to some extent. Paragraph 56, early arrival at Mass. The council, people should come to Mass on time, because what happened is with the pre-conciliar Mass, the idea was, when do you commit a mortal sin by missing Mass on Sunday? Well, if you get there in time for the offertory, it's not a mortal sin. Well, the point is, you've missed the liturgy of the Word, right? So the council says, look, liturgy of the Word, table of the Word, liturgy of the Eucharist, table of the Eucharist, those are one Mass. You should be there for the whole thing. And by and large, that's been honored after the council. Finally, the last two paragraphs, 57, 58, have to do with concelebration. They wanted to develop a rite for concelebration for more normal use. That's been done as well. So those are the things the council actually specified as changes to be made. It said nothing at all about the direction of prayer. It assumed we would always be facing east, facing the Lord. It said nothing at all about adding new canons to the Mass. It assumed we'd be using the traditional Roman canon. So that's what the council actually called for. Gomber and after Gomber, Harrison are saying the reform that took place went way beyond what the council intended, and we need, now looking back on what happened, to go, return, and redo the reform. So that's part one. That's the origin of the expression reform of the Reformed liturgy. It came from Gomber and then from Harrison. Part two now is the role of Cardinal Ratzinger. Now a little background here. In 1989, and this is a conclusion to a long, complicated history, but in 1989 I was in Rome, and I had dinner at Dodici Apostoli, a wonderful Italian restaurant, of course Italian restaurant, it's in Rome, right near the Pontifical Gregorian University, the Jesuit University in Rome. I had dinner with Father Jacques Servet, another Jesuit friend of mine, who at that time was a officialis. He was an assistant to Cardinal Ratzinger in the office of the Congregation of Doctrine of Faith. Father Schönborn, who was a friend of mine and a classmate, who with me studied under Ratzinger in Regensburg, later to become, as he is now, the Cardinal Archbishop of Vienna. And then Father Marc Ouellet, a Sulpician from Canada, who is a great scholar from Balthasar and ardent for Spire. I met him at a conference in Rome in 1985. So the four of us had dinner, and we decided that we wanted to start a house of discernment, precisely to help those who want to see this new liturgical movement grow and take shape. So, I've told you about the origin of the expression. You see now the full agreement of one of the greatest liturgists of our time, if not of all time, of the idea we need a new liturgical movement and reform of the reform. What then did he say about it after 1995, after he read this, after he says what we need? Well, this is that book which he finished in 1999, and we published in the year 2000, The Spirit of Liturgy. It's a phenomenal book. And at the beginning here, if this book were to encourage a new way, something like a liturgical movement, a movement toward the liturgy and toward the right way of celebrating the liturgy, inwardly and outwardly, the intention that inspired its writing would be richly fulfilled. So he's writing this precisely because he sees the need for a reform of the reform, for a new liturgical movement. So what does he say in this book? Buy yourself a copy back there after the talk if you wish, and find out for yourself. But I'll give you a little, teaser on this. Part 1 is called Das Wesen der Liturgie, the essence of the liturgy. And I can assure you, for Karl Ratzinger, the word Wesen, he's a German philosophical theologian, the word Wesen, essence, is a very fundamental word for him. When he uses that word, he means he's getting to the heart of things, to the essence of things. Facing east. So here are the different topics I've kind of selected out so you can see. Facing east, the Gomber proposal. Page 68. Christians look toward the east, the rising sun. In the early church, prayer toward the east was regarded as an apostolic tradition, that is, it comes from the apostles themselves. It goes back to the earliest times and was always regarded as an essential characteristic of Christian liturgy. Page 70. Wherever possible, we should definitely take up again the apostolic tradition of facing east, both in the building of churches and the celebration of liturgy. Page 74 starts a whole chapter called The Direction of Liturgy. Page 81. Every age must discover and express the essence of the liturgy anew. So every age has to look at the liturgy and find new ways of expressing its essence. The point, back to him, the point is to discover this essence amid all the changing appearances. It would be a mistake to reject all the reforms of our century wholesale, that is the 20th century. And he gives examples. When the altar was very remote from the faithful, it was right to move it back to the people. So he proves that change, getting the altar back closer to the nave. It was also important clearly to distinguish the place for the liturgy of the Word from the place for the properly Eucharistic liturgy, so separating the ambo from the altar. On the other hand, a common turning to the east during the Eucharistic prayer remains essential. This is not a case of something accidental, but of what is essential. Now, how clear and emphatic can you get than that, huh? Page 82. What is at issue is not a romantic escape into antiquity, but a rediscovery of something essential in which Christian liturgy expresses its permanent orientation. Now, he gives reasons for these conclusions in this book. And if you're interested, I encourage you to read them there because it's very beautifully done. He also says this, 83. Where a direct common turning toward the east is not possible, the cross can serve as the interior east of faith. Well, where is it not possible? In my long career as a priest, 50 years this year, I've been around the country, a lot of places, I've only found one place where it's impossible and one place where it's difficult to celebrate Mass facing east, or facing with the people. One was in Virginia at a high school chapel, and they had the altar, raised altar, and then right in front of the altar was this huge marble statue of Mother Teresa. Well, I mean, you know, it couldn't be done. And I couldn't move the statue, you know. The other one is actually the Nativity Church, my old parish where I received First Communion in Menlo Park, because they got kind of a narrow sanctuary there, and the altar is pretty high, and it's right next to the front step. And so I actually can celebrate there because I'm tall, but the altar's about here, you know. I could do it. So he does say, where a direct common turning toward the east is not possible, the cross can serve as the interior east of the west. But it's possible pretty much everywhere. Second point, separation of altar and ambo, page 72. During the liturgy of the Word, the congregation gathered around the shrine of the sacred books, or around the seat associated with it, which evolved quite spontaneously from the seat of Moses to the bishop's throne. At the end of the liturgy of the Word, during which the faithful stand around the bishop's seat, everyone walks together with the bishop to the altar, and now the cry resounds, Conversi ad Dominum, turn to the Lord. So he sees this dynamic process in the Mass, is that you've got the liturgy of the Word, and then you move towards the altar and face east. Another point, music. In the musical sphere, Biblical faith created its own form of culture. So when you talk about enculturation, he says, wait a sec, we don't enculturate the mass, that's for sure, but we have our own culture. The mass has developed its own culture over the centuries. In the musical sphere, biblical faith created its own form of culture, an expression appropriate to its inward essence, one that provides a standard for all later forms of enculturation. What do you mean by that? He doesn't mean that you have to have chant as the only form of music in Mass, but it's the standard. It's the standard by which others are measured. And I've got my little Fessio test that I proposed. When you want it, I think Lynn Cranley was here. I proposed this to him when he was music director. If you want to propose, something new, a new hymn or something like that, you make a little soundtrack and you have a chant and you put that in there and then a chant and you play it through and see if it fits. I'm telling you, On Eagle's Wings does not make the cut. Page 145. In the West, I just read that. Permanent standard. Oh, no, I did. In the West, in the form of Gregorian chant, the inherited tradition of psalm singing was developed to a new sublimity and purity, which set a permanent standard for sacred music for the liturgy of the church. So that's on the music. Now we've got a section on unspontaneity. It's hard to translate. Unbeliebigkeit, which means not having arbitrary changes or just going it impromptu when you're celebrating Mass. Page 166. The authority of the Pope is not unlimited. It is at the service of sacred tradition. Still less is any kind of general freedom of manufacture degenerating into spontaneous improvisation compatible with the essence, there it is again, of faith and liturgy. The greatness of liturgy depends, we have to repeat this frequently, on its unspontaneity. Good morning. No, it's not liturgical. 168. Only respect for liturgy's fundamental unspontaneity and pre-existing identity can give us what we hope for. The feast in which the great reality comes to us that we ourselves do not manufacture but receive as a gift. This means that creativity, he puts it in quotes, cannot be an authentic category for Mass liturgical. Kneeling, page 191. Worship is one of those fundamental acts that affect the whole man. This is why bending the knee before the presence of the living God is something we cannot abandon. It may be that kneeling is alien to modern culture, insofar as it is a culture, it says. For this culture has turned away from the faith and no longer knows the one before whom kneeling is a right, indeed the intrinsically necessary gesture. The man who learns to believe learns also to kneel. And a faith or a liturgy no longer familiar with kneeling would be sick at the core. Repeat that. A faith or a liturgy no longer familiar with kneeling would be sick at the core. And then, not in the book, but around the same time, a little later, he was talking to the priest in Brindisi, and he said, I am convinced of the importance of giving the host once again to the faithful directly in the mouth without them touching it, and the return of kneeling during communion as a sign of respect. So, again, what's happening here? I believe this man of the church, Homo Ecclesiasticus, Joseph Ratzinger, Karl Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, is one of the greatest liturgical scholars of our time. Someone who deeply loved liturgy. He was born in the midst of the Good Friday liturgy, actually born at 4:30 in the morning here. I believe this man of the church, Homo Ecclesiasticus, Joseph Ratzinger, Karl Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, is one of the greatest liturgical scholars of our time. Someone who deeply loved liturgy. He was born in the midst of the Good Friday liturgy, actually born at 4:30 in the morning on Holy Saturday. In those days, the Easter Vigil took place at 8:30, so his mother, brought him to Mass 4 hours later, baptized him. So he was born between Good Friday and Easter Sunday, and baptized at the earliest he could have been on Easter. So for him, very symbolic for me, but for him the liturgy is really his life. Notice Latin is not mentioned here. That'll come a little later. One final thing I want to talk about here in this section is a subsequent text that came from a meeting he had at Fontainebleau on the topic of the meeting was proceedings on the Fontainebleau Liturgical Conference. So here's a few quotes from what he said there. This has to do with what I'll call a missal of conversions, the old missal and the Novus Ordo, the Vetus Ordo, old missal, and the Novus Ordo, new missal. I'm quoting him again. The old missal is a point of reference, a criterion. It seems to me most important for everyone that by its presence, which is a sign of the basic identity of the two missals, that is Novus Ordo and Vetus Ordo, even if they have differing modes of expression and ritual, this missal the church should offer the church a point of reference and should become a refuge for those faithful who in their own parish no longer find a liturgy generally celebrated in accordance with the text authorized by the church. So the extraordinary form, this is before he was Pope, should be there as a point of reference for how the new missal should be celebrated. And if you can't find a parish where the new missal is celebrated reverently, well then, he says, look for the old missal. Section 3 of his presentation there was called the Reform of the Reformed. How can we return to a common rite, reformed if you like, but not fragmented, nor left to the arbitrary devices of local congregations, nor that of a few commissions or group of experts? Thus, the Reform of the Reformed, in quotes, is something which concerns the missal of Paul VI, always with the aim of achieving reconciliation with the church. Reconciliation of what? Of the two spirits that go along with the old and new missal, and also the missals themselves. He continues, as concerns the missal in current use, the first point, in my opinion, is to reject the false creativity, which is not a category in the liturgy. He repeats that. Therefore, it seems to me would be an important step towards reconciliation, simply if the missal were freed from these areas of creativity. That is, the Novus Ordo not have all these options, and not say, well, the priest says this or something similar, which do not correspond to the deepest level of reality of the spirit of liturgy. Then a little interjection here. When he became Pope, in his famous letter that introduced the motu proprio Summorum Pontificum in July 7, 2007, he says, the two forms of the usage of the Roman Rite can be mutually enriching. It is a matter of coming to an interior reconciliation in the heart of the church. So he sees the good in the reform that the council wanted. He sees the good in the traditional form prior to the council, but that we need to bring them together. In the same conference, he mentioned facing east. As I've written in my books, I think the celebration turned toward the east, towards the Christ who is coming, is an apostolic tradition. I am not, however, in favor of forever changing churches around completely. So many churches have now been restructured that starting all over again right now does not seem to be a good idea. We don't have to do it, start over again. The altar is already moved away. You can celebrate on either side of it, so that's not a problem. Finally, Latin, he says, we ought to also to preserve some elements of Latin liturgy in ordinary use. The presence of a certain amount of Latin seems to be important as constituting a bond of ecclesial fellowship and communion. So, this is the end of part 2 of my talk. Part 1 was the origin and meaning of the word reform of the reform. Part 2 is Ratzinger's, Benedict's role in that reform and what he sees it as being. And very briefly, part 3, the last part here, is what do you do now? And I would say there's some things we can do already being done. One is we want to foster, promote, and contribute to a new liturgical movement. And I think that's done, for example, by Archbishop with his Benedict XVI Institute, which was initially intended to be for sacred music and the sacred liturgy. It's expanded from that, but it still contains that within it. Uh, I think that we should keep in mind the idea of a missal of conversions, one single missal that contains elements of both the old form and the new form. And then there's the Ars Celebrandi. There's many things that can be done right now that can bring about a greater harmony between the traditional form of the Mass prior to the Council and the Mass which has been promulgated after the Council, which has many, many options. And if all you do is choose the option which is most like preconciliar Mass, you're going to already have a greater sense of harmony. So what are some examples? The most important thing to me, I believe, is ad orientem. I mean, it's permitted in the new missal. Some bishops try to prohibit it, but they're acting ultra vires, beyond their actual authority when they do that. But every priest has the right, all the faithful have a right, to have a Mass in which the priest and the people, during the liturgy and sacrifice, are facing the Lord together. So that can be done. The ambo and the altar have been separated. They should stay that way. Parts of the Mass should be in Latin or Greek. I mean, Kyrie eleison is Greek, and Hallelujah and Sabaoth, that's Hebrew, but I mean, the Agnus Dei, the Sanctus, the Gloria, the Credo can all be in Latin. Chant. I mean, chant should be the primary and most ordinary form of music at Mass. And again, as Lynn Creighton can testify, when we were out in Maria, we had chant at Mass. It only took 2 weeks before they needed no music. They could sing the Kyrie, the thing to Agnus Dei, and everybody sang. I mean, I've rarely heard a church that full voiced as when the people sang the simple chants. Kneeling, we can kneel for the canon, but also for communion. And I would say also, we can use the Roman canon, canon number 1. It's often surprising for people because I can have a come and say, what was that, Father? I've never heard that. Well, that's canon 1, you know. That's the canon which is in continuity with 1,700 years of the Church's liturgy. So, those are the things I think we can do and should do in promoting more reverence and a more traditional expression of the liturgy, and I hope I've encouraged you to take part in that to the extent you can. I've spoken about the origin of meaning of the expression. I've explained how it's embraced and developed by Cardinal Ratzinger, and I've told you what the things that we can do. So how shall I conclude? How about this? Dominus vobiscum. Benedicat vos omnipotens Deus, Pater, et Filius, et Spiritus Sanctus. Amen. Thank you.
Angel, you like it? You like Father Joseph? Okay. We're gonna go to start to see, okay? Don't be late in the Mass, okay? So we must be on time all the time, going to Mass, okay? You want to receive communion? Okay. I know you like the priest. Okay, see you. We'll go to Mass. Let's watch it again, okay?